it's wonderful to have the opportunity to do a little learning with you tonight. Tonight's topic is Rabbi Levi Epstein, the author of the Tartan Meme. And it's really like a totally different model than anything we've seen up until this point. So just to put things in context, we started with Sakachava Rabbi, the second Sakachava Rabbi, the Shem Shmuel, who was, a Hasidic Rabbi. Then we learned about Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, who was very instrumental in the creation and maintenance of the Musar Yeshiva. We turned to the rugged Shaver, who was, as his name suggests, the rugged Shaver Gaon. He was a genius of extraordinary proportion, and we got a flavor for his life. And last time we talked about Rechaim Ozer Gruzinski, who was still a different model, really the Posek Hadur, the Gadol Hadur, who had this extraordinary capacity to be halachic authority or rabbinic authority on the one hand of worldwide acclaim, and at the same time to be a political authority and to lead and guide the political lives of Orthodox Jews throughout Eastern Europe and really throughout the world. So tonight I want to talk about Rabbi Levi Epstein. Fascinating, even though he had smicha, and we'll talk about this more in a minute. He was not a rabbi by profession. Rabbi Levi Epstein, the author of the Tartan Meme and a number of other important works, was a banker. Okay, so the story of Rabbi Levi Epstein is really set in Pinsk. Okay, so let me say a few words about Pinsk, and then just again to put it in context, we talked about Dvinsk. We learned about the rugged Shaver at the turn of the century, and I said 30, 40, maybe even at some point 50% of Dvinsk was Jewish. We talked about Vilna, and maybe we had around the same proportions, but there we're talking about Vilna is 100,000 people. Pinsk is a much smaller city, if we could call it a city, 28,000 people around the turn of the century. But this is really a stunning statistic. Of the 28,000 inhabitants of Pinsk in a 1897 census, 21,000 of those 28,000 were Jewish. Okay, so you're talking about basically a Jewish town, right? If you're the non-Jew living in Pinsk, you're the minority. So, I don't know if we usually conceive of Eastern European history this way, maybe with little Shtetlach. This is 28,000 people. That's a real number, and it's three quarters Jewish. Okay, so as I like to do, really just to kind of broaden our horizons, I like to share a couple of photos or images from Pinsk around the first half of the 20th century. And again, you don't have to search that far. YIVO is an amazing resource. I know I've said it before, but if any of this interests you and you want to pursue it further, YIVO is a great first step for the study of Jewish history, particularly in this period. Okay, so a couple of images. Here's really only one picture that we have of Rabbi Levi Epstein. We'll come back to him in a second. So here's Pinsk. I put a star on the map so you could see it. This part of the world is in the news all the time right now. So there's Ukraine. Okay, so if Russia invades, by the way, so the invasion will be from the eastern border, okay, much closer to Kiev. If you're in Ukraine and you're trying to find a place to go, you're probably going to Lvov, right? That's the other big city on the western border of Ukraine. And our story in Pinsk is just north, okay? It's just north of the present-day Belarus-Ukraine border. And as we'll talk about in a minute, as you could see, because it's so close to Poland and so close to Russia, and so it was always changing hands. Okay, so a couple images that I chose for you of Pinsk. Okay, and again, this will sound familiar because sometimes the image we have from the Roman Vishniak book might look different from the particular location that we find ourselves. So in Pinsk, not so different from Dvinsk or Vilna. So you have kibbutz galios. Okay, so it's not just monolithic. There's one kind of Jew. Everybody lives in Pinsk, every kind of Jew. So here you have members of Hanoar Hatzioni, which was a youth movement affiliated with the General Zionist movement, and they're doing what youth Zionists do. They're harvesting a crop, in some field outside of Pinsk. Okay, this is really an amazing picture. This is it's really a little hard to believe, actually. Because you think of all the stories of anti-Semitism and leading up to 1939 and to the Shoah. So this is the committee of the Gemilut Chesed Society. I'm sure that's not the way they said it. I'm sure they said Gemilus Chesed Society. So Gemilus Chesed Society, it's a bunch of wealthy, Jews in Pinsk who are responsible for helping less able Jews in Pinsk. And they have this picture, 1937. Not sure what he's doing there, but front and center of the picture. And forgive me, I have no idea how to pronounce these Russian, Polish names. But Ignacy Mościcki, who's the president of Poland, he paid a visit to Pinsk. It was Poland in 1937, and he takes a picture with the Gemilus Chesed Society of Pinsk, like we're just all friends, as if, the governor would come to Manhattan Day School or the Jewish Center and we'd have a photo with the governor. So, Poland's not going to be in a very good place 2 years from now. But in 1937, I don't know, they have a friendly photo op in Pinsk with the president of Poland and the Gemilus Chesed Society. Okay, and here, just because I always like to talk about the Bundists, because when's the last time you met a Bundist? But here you have the Pinsk Library, which is maintained by the Bundists, and as you can see, looks very active. A lot of young Bundists checking out books in the Pinsk Library. Okay, so let me stop the screen share for a second and say a couple more words about Pinsk, and then start to talk about Baruch Halevi Epstein. Okay, so we're going to be in the period basically from the beginning of the 20th century through the 1930s, and obviously the central event of that time period is World War I, which I always say in the context of the personalities that we learn about. So it's upends Jewish lives the world over. It's devastating. It's not just a war, but there's famine and there's epidemic and there's hunger, and it's just terrible. People have to flee and there's nowhere to go. And so World War I upends the Pinsk Jewish community. I don't know if this is widely known. I certainly didn't appreciate this, but when the Germans got to Pinsk during World War I, they actually deported 9,000 Jews. We always think deportation is World War II phenomenon. Like they were deporting Jews. They weren't exterminating Jews, but they were deporting Jews in World War I. Okay, and others were pressed into labor forces, and there's food shortages and there's disease. It's a terrible period for Pinsk from 1918 to 1920. So Pinsk was at some point Ukrainian, at some point Soviet, at another point Polish, and the end of the story in September 1920, it's conquered by Poland, and it remains Poland until functionally until World War II. Okay. Pinsk, even though 28,000 people, 21,000 of whom are Jewish in Pinsk, so it's a very active little Jewish town. They have 3 of their own newspapers. I marvel at this because in New York City we have 0 Jewish newspapers. I mean, maybe count the Jewish press, I'm not sure. But in Pinsk, there's three Jewish newspapers. There's the Pinsker Stimme and the Pinsker Wort and the Pinsker Buch, and there's a magazine. They're very active in the press. And the Jewish history of Pinsk functionally ends in 1939. So you know that Germany invades Poland on September 1st, 1939. But the Germans don't get to Pinsk until 1941. From September 1939 until August 1941, Pinsk is occupied by the Soviets, and the Soviets take over your town, and you're a practicing Jew, so that's it for your Jewish practice. Okay, so the businesses and the factories are nationalized, and political activists are considered to be undesirable, and they're expelled. And if you have a shul, or you have a beis medrash, or you have a Jewish school, so those have to be closed and sovietized, and so on. Now, all of that is a walk in the park compared to what happens in 1941 when the Germans occupy Pinsk. They begin by murdering thousands of Jews quite publicly by gunshot. A ghetto is set up, and eventually, like 98% of the Jews of Pinsk are murdered during the Holocaust. Okay. So now let's turn back to Reb Baruch Halevi Epstein. So Baruch Halevi Epstein was born in 1860, and among all the personalities that we study this semester, he probably had the most famous family, certainly the most famous father and most famous uncle of anyone else that we learned about. His father is Rabbi Chiel Michal Epstein, the author of the Aruch HaShulchan. Okay, so Rabbi Chiel Michal Epstein, we could have done a course on him, except he was already gone by the 1920s. So Rabbi Chiel Michal Epstein was a towering figure for Jewish life. He was the rabbi in Navardik, and the Aruch HaShulchan, basically 100 years later, still rivals the Shulchan, the Mishnah Brura, as far as the most oft-cited book for contemporary halachic practice. And just to put it in perspective, we always talk about the Mishnah Brura's seminal work. We'll talk more about it in 2 weeks when we talk about the Chavetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan. So the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, is divided into 4 sections. So you have Orach Chaim, which is daily life and tells you how to keep Shabbos and how to keep the holidays and how to make brachos and how to daven. You have Yoreh Deah, which tells you everything else you need to know about daily life, kashrus and halachos of nida and so on. You have Even HaEzer, which tells you all the laws pertaining to marriage and divorce, and you have Choshen Mishpat, which tells you everything you need to know about business law. So the Mishnah Brura only took on one of these 4 sections. It's a commentary only to Orach Chaim. That's a big deal, 6 volumes, but limited. The Aruch HaShulchan is a commentary to the entirety of the Shulchan Aruch. And it's just the virtuosity and the brilliance is manifest on every page. So Reb Baruch Halevi Epstein is the son of the author of the Aruch HaShulchan, and his uncle is the Netziv, the Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin. Okay, so the yichus of Baruch Halevi Epstein is just incomparable, and we'll circle back to his family life in a moment. Okay, so he had this kind of photographic memory as a kid, and he attended the yeshiva of his uncle. He learned in Volozhin. He married the daughter of Rabbi Lazar Moshe Horowitz, who was the rabbi of Pinsk, and that's how he ended up. In Pinsk. But he never really held a rabbinic position. He worked at a bank in Pinsk, and on the side, he wrote books, which were quite important books. But that was his life, and that was his career. He lived in Pinsk for all of his life, with the exception of 3 years when he actually lived in America. 1923 to 1926, he spent in the United States. I think he was in New York. I don't really know what he was doing, where he was living. I'm pretty sure he was in New York, and it wasn't successful. He tried to find a position, he couldn't find one. He ended up going back to Pinsk. The one thing we know about the time that he spent in America is he was the head of Ezra's Torah. He was the first head of Ezra's Torah. Ezra's Torah is a very important charity organization, a beautiful tzedakah organization, which was headed by Rav Henkin and then Rav Moshe Feinstein, and still very active today. And he was, during that time, for a short period, the head of Ezra's Torah. Went back to Pinsk in 1926 and spent the rest of his time in that city. His life, and I know this is like a little bit of a trope with so many of the individuals that we've spoken about over the past few weeks, but his personal life was actually quite tragic. His wife died. She wasn't even 40. She died in 1899 during a flu epidemic, and he had four children. Most of them had left Pinsk by the 1920s, and he was, bereft. He was kind of all alone. We have some evidence that the last few years of his life, he was living in a hotel in Pinsk. World War I had knocked out the bank that he had worked for, so his financial position wasn't good anymore. He was eating in a restaurant, like a very sad end to his life, and we don't really even know how he died. The best guess is that he died after the Soviets, after the Germans rather took over Pinsk toward the end of 1941. We don't have any evidence of him being in the ghetto. So there's one story that he was in a hospital and the hospital burned down. But his end, the end of his life was equally tragic. So I want to let me pause here for a second and just ask if there are any questions or comments. Then I want to share with you some excerpts from his intellectual and literary output, which are responsible for cementing his legacy in the years following his passing. Questions or comments? Okay. So in no particular order, I want to share with you really something about four books that Baruch Halevi Epstein authored in the course of his lifetime. Okay, the most famous I'll say for last. That's the Tartan Meme, but there are at least three others that are quite worthy of comment. Okay, so the first one I want to bring to your attention is the book called Baruch She'amar. We don't often think about this because the Siddur is so familiar to us that we daven and we maybe look at the bottom and see if there's some information that will help inspire us because someone wrote a little comment. There are many commentaries on the Siddur, and Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein wrote a commentary on the Siddur. It's a beautiful work, and it's a commentary to the weekday davening and the Shabbos davening and the holiday davening. And if you ever have a question or you're interested in something about the Siddur, so the work is called Baruch She'amar, and it's quite comprehensive and quite fascinating, as we'll see. Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein was quite a novel thinker. So do you remember a few weeks ago, I sort of hope to do this back to back so you could see them side by side, but I'll just remind you. A few weeks ago, when we learned about the Rogatchover, I mentioned that he was interested in answering a kind of obscure question that comes up at the end of benching. Remember this? I said, on the weekday, we say at the end of benching, Magdil Yeshu Ot Malkov Yosei Chesed Lim Shicho, and on Shabbos, we change that word from Magdil and we say Migdol Yeshuot Malkov Yosei Chesed Lim Shicho. Doesn't really change the substance and the meaning. What is that about? Why would we change it? So the Rogatchover gave this fascinating, but really novel, and I'm not sure how satisfactory answer. He said, well, on Shabbos afternoon, there was this old tradition that you don't learn ksuvim because we wanted to get people to shul. And so this pasuk appears in two places. One of them is in Nevi'im, one of them is in ksuvim. So on Shabbos, rather than quoting the pasuk from ksuvim, we quote the pasuk from Nevi'im because, we can. There's lots of other psukim that we quote from Ksuvim on Shabbos, so that's why I say it's not necessarily the most compelling answer, but it's an attempt to at least understand why there would be that funny difference, Magdil versus Migdal. Okay, so here's another approach to this self-same problem. Okay, you ready? So this is source number one in your source sheet. Baruch She'amar, the author of the Tartan Meme, Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein, says, I want to explain this. V'chasafti b'sifrei Mekor Baruch Be'or Hadavar ki rishum zeh b'Shabbos Migdol ba b'taus me'eis echad hasofrim hamatikin seder hatvila v'snusach birkas hamazon b'ksav terem galus melachas hatvus. So I don't know if he could prove this, but he says it with such authority that he just assume it's true. He says the fact that we say Migdol on Shabbos, it's a mistake. It's a printing error. It goes back to the time before print, but he says, I'll tell you my theory. He doesn't call it a theory. He just says, this is how it is. He says, let me explain it to you. Okay, so as I just mentioned, the Rogatchover pointed this out. This pasuk appears, Magdil Yeshua, appears twice in Tanakh. Pam b'Shmuel Beis, one time in Shmuel Beis, Parak Chav Beis, pasuk Nun Aleph, upam b'Tehillim, You could look it up. Perek Yud Ches Pasuk Nun Aleph. Uve Shmuel Beis Hanusach Migdol. V'Tehillim Yagdil. Okay, and in Shmuel Beis it's Migdol, and in Tehillim it's Magdil. V'Hanusach Haragil B'Chol Yom Hu Magdil K'mo BeTehillim. We usually use the Tehillim, and it's Magdil, and Shalom Yisrael. Ve'echad HaMatikim says, now here's his theory. Ve'echad HaMatikim Rasham Lo B'Tzad HaGilyon Lahoda Ba'alma Ben Bet Shin Bet Migdol. So he says someone wrote a little note on the side of the manuscript, just as an informational note to let you know where this is from. He wrote Bet Shin Bet Migdol. V'kavanaso haisa lomar ki b'Shmuel Bet hanusach Migdol. The bencher, the sitter, the whatever you're using said Magdil. And somebody came along and just said, that in Shmuel Bet, it's a slight variation and it says Migdol, just to let you know, like a footnote. Okay. Because of Bekitza, Baroshe Tevos, Bet Shin Bet. And as is, common in notes and footnotes, so you write in shorthand. And the shorthand was Bet Shin Bet. Kilomar, Bishmuel Bet. Bet Shin Bet, Bishmuel Bet, to tell you the source of where it says Migdol, Bishmuel Bet. Ve'echad HaMatikin she'acharav talik ra milah Bet Shin Bet b'Shabbos. Someone reading that note misunderstood what the note writer had actually meant and assumed that Bet Shin Bet wasn't short for Shmuel Bet, but was short for Shabbos. Umi'az niskagel hataos me'atakal hatakam misham l'tfus ad hayom hazeh. The error became embedded in, was copied in the next manuscript and copied in the next manuscript until when they started to finally get around to the age of print and they printed the bencher, they printed the siddur. Now it said Migdol. It doesn't matter. Right? It doesn't change anything. You could say whatever you want, right? If you ask the Tartan Meme, what's the nusach? He says, it's not my deal. That's what you say. There's just a mistake in the copying and ultimately the printing of this note, and now we ended up with the word Migdol on Shabbos. Okay, so you see, this is quite a unconventional, thing for a traditional rabbi to say, basically in a kind of academic style, attributing a misunderstanding in the manuscript tradition, right, and blaming it for the discrepancy in the text. Okay, so again, I don't think we found the manuscript that said Bet Shin Bet, but it's a perfectly good theory in principle. Okay, so again, just sharing one excerpt. It's a whole book and a beautiful commentary on the siddur called Baruch Shamar, a play on his name, Baruch Halevi Epstein. Okay, the second book, which I'm not going to talk about, is also a commentary on the Torah, much less well known than his other commentary, which I will talk about. It's called Tosfos Bracha, another commentary on the Torah. The third book that he wrote, which I do want to talk about for a minute, is called Makor Baruch. And again, a play on his name, Makor, the source or the background of Baruch, Baruch Halevi Epstein. Okay. So I can't prove this, but the story goes like this. During the First World War, Baruch Halevi Epstein wasn't able to do what he was normally doing. His bank closed, and it wasn't the time to get into deep Talmudic discourses. So he decided to write a different kind of book, and he wrote a memoir. Okay. Makor Baruch, it's like nothing else. Okay, it's not just a memoir. It's like memoir / family history. 4 volumes, 2,000 pages, and it's this candid and fascinating portrait of his family, which itself would be fascinating, whoever his family was. But it's particularly fascinating because his family was a family of some of the most important, rabbinic leaders of the 19th century. Okay, so it's a treasure trove. It's a treasure trove for anyone interested in rabbinic biography and Jewish history for this period. Now, think it was around 25 years ago. Parts of this book were translated and published. There's a couple different volumes out there. One of them is called My Uncle the Netziv, okay, because there's a lot in Makor Baruch about the uncle of Baruch Halevi, who was the Netziv, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. And then there's another book called The Making of a Gadol. You could Google it. You could find it on eBay. If you find an original, so I don't know, if it probably costs like $1,000. Because it caused such a scandal that it was recalled and then ultimately republished. What was the scandal? Now, mind you, the book had no new, it was just a translation of excerpts from Baruch Halevi Epstein's memoir. So it just happens to be, right, he wasn't making it up, but Baruch Halevi, just by the by, said something like, don't quote me on this, I don't remember if this is the thing, but something like, oh, and my Netziv read the newspaper. My uncle, the Netziv, read the newspaper. But if you are of a certain, persuasion, to say that the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin read a newspaper is scandalous. We can't say such things. So they had to recall the book and republish it, like the redacted version. He read certain materials, and the next line, move along. So you could redact these things all you want, but the point is that in the original, so this very fascinating information about the Netziv and about his family is plain for all to see, and you have to work through. It's in Hebrew before modern Hebrew was invented, but that's okay. And all of this is plain to see. So just again to give you a flavor and a flair. Okay, I just picked one excerpt because it's one of the more intriguing, because he has a chapter on his aunt. Okay, he has a chapter on his aunt, the wife of the Netziv. Okay, the Rebbitzin. Right? When's the last time you ever heard anybody talk about the Rosh Yeshiva's wife, the Gadol Ador's wife? Like, it's fascinating. Like, what were they like? Anybody know? So yeah, Baruch Halevi Epstein knows because he grew up in the Netziv's house. So what a portrait, what a window into this world. Okay, so I just wanted to share a couple excerpts with you. And again, it's 2,000 pages. I'm giving you like two. And you could choose any two at random, and it would be fascinating. But this is about the Rabbis. Okay. So he writes the following. He says, Ki ishto harishona harabanit reina batya basa gaon Reb Yitzchak mivolazhin. Okay, so Netziv was married 2 times. His first wife passed away. So this is a recollection of his first wife. Imi osa isha kshera v'chachmat tnua umilumedes muflaga. So first thing you have to know is that she was a wonderful person. She was brilliant, modest, and very, very learned. Be'erech malas hagvarim hashleimin. Okay, so it's like a little politically incorrect, but he says like something to the effect of, she could hack it with any male counterpart. V'meyosa, I'm not sure what that next word is. Chasa me'od al shlamo brioso. I think it's chasa me'od al shlamo brioso, and she always was very concerned about her husband's well-being and how he was doing and his health. Lo isa yichula b'chol zos lepakeach al halichus habayis v'al hamichya v'halkala liosa chalusha v'refuyas atzavim kimat sheyichula lachzik ma'amad b'gufa b'chol od nishmasa ba. Okay, but she had her own, physical ailments, and in some ways she was limited. Okay, so this is my image of her. He's writing this, maybe 20, 30 years after it happened. But his memory, and maybe he's a teenager, maybe a young man, he says, this is my memory. She would always sit right next to the furnace in the kitchen. She'd sit there in the summer too. And piled on the table in front of her, the kitchen table, were all these books. I'll tell you and he has a photographic memory. So he says, I'll tell you exactly what books were on her table. Tanakh, Mishnayos, Ein Yaakov, Midrashim Shanim, Menorah Samaor, Kava Yashar, Tzemach David, Shevet Yehuda. All these, fascinating books of Torah commentary. The Od, Kama, V'Kama, Starim, Miminim, Elo, Misifrei Agada. All kinds of books. V'chol Yuna, V'chol Simas Liba, Im Kol Chusha Gishuse. Okay, and she was totally invested in all of them. She poured over them. She you have this image. She was just head and shoulders into the book. You couldn't even move her. And like the housework and whatever is going on, she wasn't moved. And more than once, I heard her lament. She felt sick over it. She felt embittered. She felt like the women, that the Jewish women had gotten the raw end of the deal in this world. She felt like she was cheated because she doesn't get to do all these mitzvos that are time bound. So tefillin and tzitzis and sukkah and lulav, she's like, why I'm missing out. Umevin. Shpune tmune hisrumes haisa kemo bokas ve'ola tzluna charisha v'kinan avshis alagvarim asher zachu b'chol asher lahem ramach mitzvos asinu lehena aluvos v'hanichlamos ach shalosh nasli. Okay, and she would lament like the men got all these mitzvos and the women have 3 special mitzvos there. It's like, why do they get so many more than we do? Okay, so fascinating portrait of Reina Batya, the wife of the Netziv. I'll just give you one more excerpt. I actually have it in English, so maybe just in the interest of time, because it was translated, I'll share it with you in the English. He writes that they used to spar. He and his aunt used to spar, and she would say, I'm learning Torah, and he would say, women don't really learn Torah, and she'd say, I'm learning. So, and this was part of their debate. She says, as for the saying of our sages, anyone who teaches his daughter Torah, it's as if he taught her vanity. A very troubling line, in our 21st century sensibilities. The Gemara and Sota, if you teach your daughter Torah, it's like teaching her tiflus. So she quoted this source, and she says, perhaps this refers to one who teaches her in her childhood, while it is yet unclear whether her actions are pure and whether her works will be upright. But as for those women whose hearts draw them to the labor of God, and who from their own free will choose the good because it is good, they will ascend the Lord's mountain. Don't try to stop me from learning God's Torah. They will dwell in his holy place, for they are exemplary women. And the sages of the generation should glorify them, magnify them, set them in order, strengthen their hands, and encourage their limbs. Do and succeed. And from heaven will you be aided. Okay, she had some medieval commentary that lauded women's learning. She read it to her nephew, and he said, when I had finished reading, or she gave it to him to read, when I finished reading, she said to me, in my opinion, each and every one of these words should be encased with a casing of gold, like precious stones or pearls, and the whole book in a silver band. What do you say about that? Okay, throwing it back to young Baruch Halevi Epstein, in this debate with his very progressive, end of the 19th century, very progressive aunt, the wife of the Netziv. Okay, so she deserves her own, biography, but we just have a few excerpts from her nephew, and we're fortunate enough that he wrote this. I mean, nobody's read it cover to cover that I know, right? 2,000-page memoir about the members of his family and life in Eastern Europe at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. Okay, let me pause and just ask if there are any questions, and then I want to kind of bring things together by spending the last time that we have together on the Tartan Meme.
Is the book Baruch She'amar in print?
Baruch She'amar on the Siddur is is in print. Yes, I believe it is in print. You can probably find, you could definitely find that on Hebrew books. Makor Baruch also is in print and is available on Hebrew books, 4 volumes. And again, if you don't mind a little editing, there's some excerpts now available in English. My uncle the Netziv, it's I think like an art scroll, and the making of a gadol, which has been now republished a few times, and you can find different versions over the past years. And you can find the original if you go to the library. I mean, the library has it. You just on eBay, it'll cost a fortune. Okay, so now I want to turn to the Tartan Meme. In 1904, Baruch Levi Epstein published his Tartan Meme, I'll just share with you. I don't know if it's apocryphal or if it's true, but this is sort of the story that they tell. The Rosh Yeshiva, the Netziv, was this must have been he died I think a year after the Levine Yeshiva closed in 1893. So some point before then, the Rosh Yeshiva, the Netziv, was once sitting surrounded by some of his students, and the Netziv asked the students the following question. He said, here's the case. 2 brothers shared a business for many years. The relationship was good, but at some point the relationship soured. Okay? And one of the brothers swore that he would never see his brother again. At some point, the second brother died, and the surviving brother felt charata. He felt like he shouldn't have taken that oath, and he wanted to return to the grave of his deceased brother and ask for his forgiveness. Okay, so hear the conflict. He took an oath, but now he regrets the oath that he had taken. Is the oath still in play? It's a big deal. You can't violate an oath. So what's the halacha? Okay, so he came to see the Rav and asked if he's permitted to see his brother after death, and Netziv threw it out to see if anyone could answer the question. And young Baruch said, "I have an answer for you." Okay. So he says, based on the pasuk in Parshas Bo, he says. He says that Moshe Rabbeinu told the Jewish people, "You'll never see the Egyptians again," but it wasn't true, because a few chapters later, they do see the Egyptians again when they wash up on the seashore after Kriyas Yamsuf. So Baruch Halevi Epstein said that's the answer to the question. So he said that's the proof that seeing someone after they've died is not considered seeing them. Otherwise, the Torah never could have said it. So the brother is not bound by this oath anymore. To see someone means to see them when they're alive, and to see them after the dead is nothing like seeing them when they're alive. So as the story goes, and I think I think that he writes this in Makor Baruch. So according to this story, it was that experience that encouraged him to write a commentary on the Torah. So as we'll see in a second, I want to turn to the introduction, but the goal is to show the interrelationship between the Torah Shebechsav and Torah and the Torah Shebal Peh. So let's learn for a second the introduction to the Tartan Meme, or at least a couple excerpts, and then I want to sort of share with you how the book works, and we'll learn a couple of pieces together so you can get a flavor for what it is that he's doing. Okay, so let's look at the introduction, which you have on your source sheet in source number 5. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll just sort of summarize that first paragraph. He says, we have this Masorah. Moshe gave the oral Torah to Yeshua, and then Yeshua the Zikanim, and Zikanim to the Nevi'im, and we have all the way through the time of the Mishnah, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi decided to write it down, and then the authors of the Gemara commented, and we have Midrashim. That's beautiful. That's the development of the Tarshivam. But he says there's a problem. Okay, Achen lios shechibor Mishnah gamhu be'arko aruch miyusad achmil chalei krei Tarshivam. Halachos psukos v'ktsaros v'im zeh lo natan lanu chibur zeh musag klali me'ofen ha'yisiachos Tarshivam leTarshibchsav k'vi shemisad l'Moshe Rabbeinu al pi perishim ve'erim v'klalim u'lemudim yisadi. He says, you can read the Mishnah all you want, but it's opaque in the sense that you'll never be able to tease out the relationship between the written Torah and the oral Torah. Kemo al pi yud gimel midos ve'akeshim v'smichos rama eksuvim v'ta'amim lefikach adayin lo yispik chibur zeh l'malach yisar chashash shachachas Torah shabal peh b'mloa v'tzivyona. Okay, so it's insufficient. So the rabbis knew it was insufficient. And so that gave rise to more writings. And they wrote midrashim. Okay, and I'm sure, as I've said to you in the past, so medrash just means rabbinic writing. It just means a commentary, like the word drash. So the midrashim written for the next 1,000 years to explicate the Torah and develop the Torah Shabbat. Okay, next paragraph. He says, Hine. Okay, what I've tried to do here is tell you the development of the Torah and the Torah Shabbat from its inception. Even though all these things are, they're well known, we know this story. But my point here is to demonstrate Kizos HaTorah, Torah Shebechtav, Achos Te'omis Hi LeTorah Shabbat Peh, is that the Torah Shabbat Peh and the Torah Shebechtav are twins, and they complement each other, and they go together, and they're interrelated. Ta'amei Tzviyah, U'kenefesh Beguf, like a soul and a body, U'chshalheves B'psila, or like a wick and a candle. Achuz Advuka Torah Achas Bechevrita. So you can't have one without the other; they're inseparable. V'chol zman shelo nitzaref elea el haTorah Ksuvah. He says if you have one without the other, you can't say you have a complete Torah, you're missing something. So he says, my point in my commentary is to show the relationship between the Torah Shebechsav and the Torah Shabbat. So how often does this happen? You're reading a pasuk, you're learning the parsha, you see a Rashi, and somebody quotes a medrash that just seems off the wall. Okay, pick your medrash. Rivka is bringing buckets of water to feed the camel, and by the way, she's 3. What are you talking about? It can't be. And okay, one after the next, right? Sometimes in the drashim are very simple to understand. Sometimes it's just out of left field and bizarre. So the Tartan Meme says, I have the solution for you, okay? My job is going to be to explain why the Medrash is doing what it's doing based on the Psukim. So what a boon, okay? And it's a double boon. I'll show you why. So first of all, the Torah Shabbat Peh is not ordered. So, and the Torah Meme highlights this as introduction. He says, you want to learn Parshas Vayakel, and you want to know, what do Chazal say about Parshas Vayakel? It's very nice to read the Sforno and the Rishonim, the medieval commentators, beautiful. But much earlier than that, what did the Gemara say about it? What did Sifra say about it? What did the Talmud Yerushalmi say about it? So there's an offhanded comment in the 3rd parak of Sota. I'm just reading the Parsha. I'm going to know where to look in the 3rd parak of Sota to find a comment on this pasuk. I would never find it in a million years. So the Tartan Meme says, it's no problem. I got it. He doesn't say this, but I'll put the words. I have an encyclopedic memory. I know where all the sources are, and I'll organize them for you. So anytime there's any comment in the Yerushalmi or the Bavli or the Sifra or the Sifri or the Medrash Rabbah or any Medrash, I'll cite it for you. And I'll tell you all the Mamrei Chazal, not all of them, but practically speaking, all of the Mamrei Chazal on this pasuk. Okay, sometimes there aren't any, sometimes there's one, sometimes there are 10, and he gives you all of them. Okay, so to learn the Torah Meme actually requires a kind of 3-part process. Okay? First, you have to know the pasuk. Okay, so I just gave you the printed, rather than just giving you like the text version from online. I thought it's actually very important to see the printed page of the Tartan Meme. So the top half of the printed page looks like any standard chumash. You have the chumash, the text of the chumash. You have Onkelos on the side, which he expects that you'll know, and you have Rashi, which he expects that you'll know. Okay, so part one is to know chumash and maybe chumash Rashi, chumash Onkelos. That's part one. Part two, which he calls the Tartan Meme, is at the bottom. He gives you the notes. He says, this is the comment from Chazal on this pasuk. So I just picked this one at random. Okay, this from last week's parsha, Perek Lamed Beis, pasuk Hey, Svar Yar Aharon Ma Ra'a, and he says there's a medrash, or a Gemara from Sanhedrin. There happens to be one comment on that pasuk, and he cites it for you. Okay, so part number two, even just that would be a boon to know, like these are the midrashim on the pasuk. Otherwise, you can never find them. Okay, and then part number three, below the line, he has notes, and the notes explain what the medrash is doing. Okay, sometimes the medrash is not comprehensible. He says, "I'll explain it to you." Sometimes there's like a disconnect between the medrash and the pasuk. He says, "I'll explain it to you." And this is the massive contribution of the Tartan Meme. Now, not every explanation is compelling, not every explanation is provable, but at least it pushes the conversation forward and helps begin to address, right, so many of the challenges or the problems that pop up when we try to reconcile the Tarashivasa and the Tarshivam. Now, I've been speaking in the abstract, but let me see if I can demonstrate it for you. I just chose almost at random a couple examples from this past week's parsha to show you the Tartan Meme in action. Okay, so let's do it. Again, the three stages. We'll learn the pasuk, we'll see the medrash or the Gemara that he quotes, and then we'll see how he pieces it together. So let's see if we can learn a pasuk or two together. Okay, the story of the Egel. Perek Lamed Beis pasuk Aleph Vayara Am Ki Boshesh Moshe Laredas Minahar. The people saw that Moshe was delayed coming down the mountain. Vayikahela Am al Aron. They gathered up on Aaron. They ganged up on him. Vayomer Elav, and they said, Ku Masei Lanu Elohim Asher Yilchu Lefaneinu. Let's make for ourselves a god to go in front of us. Because this man Moshe went up the mountain. He was the one who brought us out of Egypt. We don't know what happened to him. Okay, that's the pasuk. So the Tartan Meme says, before he says anything, he just cites for you. He says there's a Gemara in Shabbos, and again, unless you just learn this or you remember it or you know it, like how would you know there's a Gemara on Peites, Shabbos Peites and Aleph that explains or has a comment on this line Ki Boshesh Moshe. Now remember, we translated it. I don't think there's really another alternative, but we translated it as Ki Boshesh Moshe, that Moshe delayed. Okay, he tarried, he was late coming down the mountain. So the Gemara says, Al Tikra Boshesh Ella Ba'ushesh. Don't read the pasuk Boshesh that he delayed. Ella, take apart the word Boshesh, break it into two words. It's a medrash, Gemara. Ba'ushesh. He came at 6. Okay, Gemara continues. Bisha sha'ala Moshe l'marom, Armelem l'Yisrael. There's no pasuk that says this. Okay, this is the Gemara. This is the Tarshivam. The Masorah tells us that when Moshe went up the mountain, he said, "Guys, I'm going up the mountain." Lasof arba'im yom, b'tchilas sheish aniba. 40 days from now, at the beginning of the 6th hour, again, they don't have watches, right? They're telling time with the sun. So beginning of the 6th hour, midday, I'm coming back. That's the backstory. Fast forward, Egel Azav. What happened? So I'll tell you what happened. L'sof arba'im yom. At the end of those 40 days, Ba Satan v'irbeves ha'olam. Along came the Satan, and he confused everyone. Amar lahem. And he said, Heichan Moshe. Where's Moshe? Amru lo alel amaron. So they said, where do you mean, where's Moshe? Moshe went up the mountain to get the Torah. Amar lahu ba'ushesh v'lo ba. And Satan said he was supposed to be back by 6. He's not here. And so the Gemara says, now you know the rest of the story. Understand, it wasn't like they were so impatient. It was a broken promise. He wasn't back when he said he would be back. Okay, so it's very interesting. But at the very least, the Tartan Meme wants to know, like, what prompted that comment? Okay, sometimes you get a medrash to try to fill in the blanks where there's a hole in the story. There's a problem with the pasuk, something doesn't read well. He says, what prompted this comment of the Gemara? So he says, I'll tell you. He says, Rotze Lomar. And again, this is the Aleph. I'm sorry, this font got too big, so it stopped being a footnote. But he's commenting on the word, right? He puts a footnote on the word ba'ushesh, the phrase ba'ushesh. Says, Rotze Lomar, Avru shesh sha'os hayom va'od lo ba. 6 hours went by, he didn't come. As the Gemara explains, he's supposed to be back by 6. That was the promise, and he wasn't there. He was late. He says this is why the Gemara decided to reinterpret the word boshesh and give it another layer of meaning. Right? The pshat is that he was delayed. And the pasuk makes perfect sense to say that he was delayed. When you're getting this whole midrashic thing about the Satan and the 6th hour, like, where did that come from? He says, I'll tell you where it came from. Mishum lefi chukei halashon hayatzarch lamar ki bush b'shin echad. So he says, in the grammar of the thing, in biblical Hebrew, if you wanted to say that he was late, the Torah should have said, ki bush Moshe, that Moshe delayed with 1 shin. Kimo vayachalu ad bush vayivtzeru ad bush. Again, he has a photograph. Remember, so he pulls out the other examples in Tanakh where this word comes up, and he says we have examples of this. Ukfilos hashinu nimtza rakan v'shoftim hey b'sifstra. This language of boshesh with 2 shins appears only 2 times in all of Tanakh. Okay. And he says they have the same drasha in that spot. There's an extra letter. So the extra letter, he says, is the hint. Now, the medrash, still goes off where it goes with Satan. But now you understand why there's coded in the word boshesh something more than the surface meaning. Again, the Gemara is not saying it doesn't mean boshesh. It doesn't mean, meaning that's the pshat. Ein mikra yotze midei pshuto. Everyone is operating with that rule. What the Gemara is saying, there's another layer of meaning which can be extracted from the fact. Now we know where it's coming from. The Tartan Meme says from the fact there's an extra letter here, and I would only know that if I had someone guiding me who knew all of Tanakh and knew when it should say bush and when it should say boshesh, and that's how the Tartan Meme explains what happened. Okay, we're almost out of time. Let me give you one more example. Let's learn just the second half of that pasuk, okay? Because we're right here. So what did the people say? Vayomer elav, they said to Aaron, Kuma se'lanu olim asher yilchu lefeinim, ki zeh Moshe ha'ish asher lanu me'eretz Yisraelim lo yadanu mehayila. We don't know what happened to Moshe. It's a strange formulation. Ki zeh Moshe ha'ish. Zeh, I don't know. I would just say Moshe ha'ish, the man.
Send from you. I don't want to send it. You send it.
It's a strange formulation. Okay. So what's happening? So the Tartan Meme says, well, first of all, let me just tell you that there is a comment here from well, now I don't even know where it's from. Okay, let's just say it's a medrash. Source number 8. So the Medrash says, "Ki zeh Moshe ish lesof arba'im yom kishelo ba Moshe amar lemasatan Yisrael Moshe meis v'lo hishkichu lav hera lahem dmus mitaso v'hainu tukamer ki zeh Moshe ish." Another off-the-wall Medrash. Satan is everywhere. Okay, maybe it's from the same. Maybe it's a continuation of the same Gemara. At the end of 40 days, Moshe didn't show up. The Satan showed up and said, "Moshe's dead." They didn't believe him. And he said, I'll show you the image of his coffin. And that's why the pasuk says, Kizeh Moshe Ha'ish. What's happening here? What is that Gemara telling us? What's going on? So the Tartan Meme says, let me explain. Kilomar hera lahem b'dimyon uvrayon dmus mitaso in gufo k'dei la'ames tevarav sha'amar shemes. Satan decided to show a visage, an image of Moshe in his coffin to lend credence to his claim that Moshe had died. V'nira dilamdo kein milashon kizeh Moshe. So where did the Gemara get that from? It got it from that strange formulation of the pasuk where it says kizeh Moshe. V'kasafta b'chibarenu kol pam ki lashon zeh moreh b'kol makom al hora be'etzba. He says, I want to tell you a rule that always applies. When there's the word zeh, Chazal always say it means that someone pointed to the thing. This means zeh, and they point to it. Okay, and you know, there's 100 examples. V'imkein kisha'amru kan ki zeh Moshe Ha'ish. So he says that's the basis for this midrashic explanation. If the pasuk says ki zeh Moish, harei hera be'etzbo alav. Okay, so it must be that someone was pointing. But it wasn't true. He wasn't there because it wasn't actually true. So he must have just shown an image because the actual thing didn't exist. The Satan had made it up out of whole cloth. So we're out of time. As always, I'm happy to stay on and take questions or comments. But I'll just close by saying this, right? What a dugma, what a model for us, you know, regular folks in the 21st century. You don't have to be a Rosh Yeshiva. You don't have to be, you know, an academic. You could be a banker and have a regular day job and change the world by contributing these extraordinary books to Jewish life. Okay, so you should just know about this resource. It's been translated. The Tartan Meme is in print. It's in English. It's in Hebrew. It's available in any Jewish bookstore or on Amazon. And what a world it opens. So that you'll know every medrash that's knowable when it comes to any pasuk on the Torah, and could be the most obscure thing in the world. You'll know it because the Tartan Meme will cite it. And B, right, whenever questions come up, like what is that medrash? It'll help you understand Rashi, right? Half the time Rashi quotes a medrash or Gemara that we don't understand. So the Tartan Meme will have it, and he'll give you his best attempt at explaining the connection between the Tarashivasa and the Tarshivam to make sure, right, as he wrote in his introduction, that we understand the wholeness and the complementarity of these two Torahs, the Tarshivam and the Torah and the Tarshivichsa. Please God, next week we'll talk about Rav Kook, and 2 weeks from tonight, the Chafetz Chaim. I wish everyone a wonderful evening.